Who's making waves in the South China Sea? China, the Philippines, or the US? Once again, some uninhabited reef in the South China Sea becomes flashpoint in the press. China is blamed for bullying its small neighbor, encroaching on international freedom of navigation, and being unrestrained, among others. A CNN reporter even happened to be on site, making a case against China to the global audience. So let's dive into it today. The reef called Renai Jiao by China, or Second Thomas Shoal in English, is at the center of the dispute. It's not just your nondescript reef lost in the middle of the sea, but one with a Filipino warship grounded on it for 25 years. Over the past year, the waters became choppier and skirmishes have been erupting much more frequently in the vicinities. What are the facts? What are fantasies? Who is the agent provocateur? Welcome to this special edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin, coming to you live from Beijing. I'm pleased to be joined from Haikou, southernmost China's province of Hainan, by Yang Yan, director of the Research Center of Oceans Law and Policy at the National Institute for South China Sea Studies. Here in the studio, Ina Tangen, senior fellow at Taihe Institute. From Washington, D.C., Klaus Laris, a fellow at the Woodrow Wilson Center, and the Richard M. Krasnell, distinguished professor of history and international affairs at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Last but not least, from Manila, the Philippines, by Herman Teo Loro, president of a Manila-based think tank, Asian Century Philippines Strategic Studies Institute. The warmest welcome to all of you, everyone. Now, Ina, let me go to you first. In March alone, there have been two clashes or confrontations between Chinese and Filipino vessels near the Renai Jiao. We all saw the footage. So what happened in a nutshell?
Well, the Philippines is intent on making sure that this is an issue, and that seems to be much more for domestic politics, but also trying to get more bases and support from the United States. The question is security more important against China, which has not started a war, or is economics, when the Philippines appears to be doing very well last year, projected to do very well this year. Why are they doing this? And many people are asking the same questions. Why is this a priority when you have a country with one of the worst Gini indexes, the disparities between rich and poor in the ASEAN grouping?
So basically, we were seeing a Filipino ship bumping into Chinese vessel there. But we'll get to the details on the sea later. But here is how China has been responding. On March the 24th, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs says China is willing to properly resolve disputes through dialogue and negotiation with the Philippines. However, the Philippines, acting in bad faith, has attempted to illegally send construction materials to its so-called grounded military vessel on Renai Reef to reinforce it into permanent facilities. China will by no means sit idly by. Yang, let me go to you for Yang Yan, sorry. Let me go to you for what is all about this vessel that's been grounded. You don't see in the footages on the press so much.
Yes, actually, I think the fundamental reason what is happening recently is the Philippines, the Marcos government is trying to change the status quo in the South China Sea by making the ship BRP of Sierra Mandra a permanent occupation on the Second Thomas Shoal by sending all those construction materials. So this is something that I think is trying to change.
So how come the ship? Yeah, how come the ship was grounded on the Renai Reef 25 years ago in 1999. Could you just very briefly give us the background there?
Yes, 25 years ago, the ship was grounded on Renai Reef with the excuse of a mechanical fault. And then the then president promised to tow the ship away, but yet it's still there 25 years later.
Was it an accident? Was it accident or was it intentional? Did anybody know?
I personally think it's intentional with the excuse of a mechanical fault.
But what's the point? What has been the explanation from the Filipino side about this ship having an accident, or did they ever deny that it was intentional?
Well, to me, I think back then they were trying to occupy more inhabited features in the South China Sea and trying to make a new status quo by occupying the Second Thomas Shoal.
All right, let's get the Filipino perspective. Mr. Herman Teo Loro, what has been your knowledge of the story about this ship that is the excuse of all the drama that's been unfolding over the 25 years? What's the Filipino story?
Well, first thing that is very important to keep in mind is that we have had peace and quiet in relation to this Ayungin Shoal called in the Philippines or Second Thomas Shoal for the past 25 years. And all this trouble started only in 2023 when the Americans introduced a project called Project Mushu, which is intended, they say, to exact reputational cost on China by what they call assertive transparency, meaning propaganda. Now, I was a confidant of the president of the Philippines at that time, 1999 to the rest of the decade of the first 2000s. And I personally know that, and President Estrada at that time confided in me that he did commit to pull the ship out. And that was grounded in order to have a claim on that area. So this is confirmed by many other testimonies, and there was a debate at that time between some hawkish faction of the Philippine government, represented by the Defense Secretary, then Secretary Orly Mercado, and the Foreign Secretary at that time, Domingo Siason, the late Domingo Siason, who was more dovish. But President Estrada himself was very friendly to President Chiang Jae-min at the time. And he told me that he was getting a lot of loans from President Chiang Jae-min. And he did commit to pull it out, but he says it's a strategy to for the Philippines to have an anchor in the area. So,
Mr. Loro, did the Philippines never had a territorial claim over the Rongay Jiao in the past until they changed their discourse over in the early 2000s? What happened? Because according to international treaties such as treaties of Washington, treaties of Paris, or treaty between the UK and the US concerning the Philippines territory, the Rongay Jiao is clearly outside their territory.
Well, what the Philippines today is getting confused about, and it's even the Philippine position is not very clear because, of course, what they're claiming is EEZ, an exclusive economic zone based on the UNCLOS. However, even that does not apply because, as the arbitration panel discussed, the BRP Sierra Madre is a military ship. It's a naval ship. It disqualifies it for consideration under UNCLOS because a militarized situation cannot be resolved through UNCLOS. So it's a special case. And even the ARC advocate of the claim of the Philippines over that area, Justice Carpio, has withdrawn his position that this BRP Sierra Madre can be used as an anchor for a claim.
Professor Lares, let me bring you in there. You see in the American press, for instance, that this is all about obstruction of navigation freedom, but they don't tell you a story about the ship grounded there as an anchor in the Philippine perspective for that piece of territory there.
Well, I wouldn't make such a fuss about the actual ship, and let me just,
why not?
If I may correct the speaker, there were actually serious tension in the South China Sea and around the Second Thomas Shoal in 2014, also in 2021 and 22. It didn't all start in 2023. And we all know that the UN Permanent Court of Arbitration in 2016 said that the Second Thomas Shoal is in the exclusive economic zone of the Philippines. So it is sovereign Philippine territory. And if they wish to ground a ship there, they can do so. And they want to resupply the 12 or so soldiers on that ship every 2 or 3 weeks. And that is a problem that Chinese vessels do want to block, that resupply of the ship. I think the reading in China and the Western world and the Philippines is very, very different. But I think there is room for improvement here, and we should not try to escalate the situation, but de-escalate the situation. We are talking about the resupply of a former ship which is actually grounded, which cannot do anything? And is it really necessary to have a world crisis about the resupply of 12 soldiers on a semi-submerged reef in the South China Sea? I think this should not lead to international crisis. Even there is talk of war about that. And I think this is despicable. We should not be talking about war in the South China Sea when we talk about a submerged reef. And if I may that, there are rumors, and of course I don't know whether these rumors are correct, but there are rumors that the former Chinese ambassador to the US has said that China wants to take the second Thomas Shoal. I don't know if that is correct, but there are rumors in the press. And if that is correct, I think this is totally unacceptable.
Okay,
no one
right.
should take that ship or that.
I have to correct the speaker.
Okay, Laura wants to say something. Sorry,
Yes.
Mr.
Well,
Carr.
the previous speaker is erroneous in saying that the Philippines is sovereign in an EEZ. Exclusive economic zone does not provide, does not extend sovereignty. It only provides sovereign rights. So even in that case, the speaker is in error. Number two, in the 25 years, that is over 8,500 days, the speaker spoke of 2 or 3 incidents. That is insignificant. But what happened after February 2023 was almost weekly incidents. This was deliberate and a strategy of the Americans, as I said, what they called assertive transparency, which is to create a situation using provocations from the Philippine Coast Guard. So it is very clear it is a strategy of the Americans to provoke tension and conflict in Asia.
Mr. Laris,
Can I just reply?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we all know that China has the largest coast guard in the world. The Philippines is a much smaller country with much smaller coast guard. It doesn't have the military capacity to provoke. It is clearly that the larger country, the larger military, the larger coast guard is doing the provocation here. I think the Philippines is the underdog on this occasion, and I think we should try to de-escalate the situation rather letting it spin out of control.
Yeah,
You're
Klaus,
right.
you have made
about
you have made a point that's on the mind of a lot of people, basically saying because China's size is bigger, so China is the bad guy here. I want to bring in Aina here. How do you react to that? Because we hear that argument all the time. It's like because of the size of China, it shouldn't do anything. Is that the case, or?
These are State Department talk points. They're trying to say, oh, look, China's ganging up on little Philippines. But in fact, and even my colleague in Washington would have to admit that the U.S. is trying to provoke this. They're trying to have a situation where they can have another proxy war, tension, conflict, whatever you want to call it, which is aimed at derailing Chinese economic efforts. I mean, ASEAN has been a bright spot for trade. It is now the number one. The Philippines has benefited from that. And what do you see the U.S. doing? Trying to separate it, trying to find willing proxies who are willing to do this. You know, my colleague in Washington also forgot to point out that this is completely illegal under international law. You cannot just sail ships onto shoals and claim them. This is an area which is claimed by 5 different countries. So this idea that somehow this is Philippines versus China is nonsense. All right. This was an illegal act, and it continues to be one. And it's a provocation that is being, puffed out by Washington in its desire to forestall, contain China.
Yeah, Ms. Yan, over the past, just a moment, over the past, how did the two countries manage the situation? Because this has been going on for 25 years, and yet it seemed that the two sides had a way of managing their differences. And what changed under President Marcos Jr.?
Yes, I think that in the past we do have many communication channels like the BCM, the bilateral consultative mechanism, and also I think the two sides, China and the Philippines, has a gentleman's deal. That's why the ship can stay there for the past 25 years, because China, if it is for humanitarian reasons to send the food and waters, that China is okay with that, but not the construction material, and is trying to change the status quo. At one point,
How do we know for sure? How do we know for sure that these are construction materials?
Because we can see it, it's all on their ship. It's all on the supply ship. it's very clearly to be seen on the scene. And also, I think one point that hasn't been mentioned before is the President Marcos is a very interesting person. We've talked a lot about the United States, but I think President Marcos is a very ambitious person. He wanted to leverage the big power competition and wanted to gain more defense budget from the extra-regional countries like the U.S., Japan, and Australia. So I think this is a very important point to mention.
All right, let's take a look at. Yeah, Mr. Lauro, I will.
I have to add several points.
Yeah. Just a moment. Just a moment. I have a timeline to give, and I give you the chance to speak right after that. So basically, let's take a look at what's been happening since the beginning of last year. For instance, in February last year, the Philippines decided it will give the U.S. access to 4 military bases in the Philippines, that bringing the total number to 9. In September last year, Washington and Manila conducted a joint bilateral sail through parts of the South China Sea. From November last year to February this year, both navies, I mean the U.S. and the Philippines, conducted what they call maritime cooperative activity on 3 occasions in the South China Sea. In late February this year, President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. told the press after his speech at the Australian Parliament that he expects Canberra to stand alongside the Philippines in the South China Sea against China. Early March, Australia announced some $190 million in funding for ASEAN projects in areas including maritime security, and it was reported days ago that the US, the Philippines, and Japan would launch joint naval patrols in the South China Sea later this year. It's part of a package, as reported, a package of initiatives the 3 countries will unveil at their first ever trilateral summit this month. So, Mr. Lauro, what is it that you wanted to tell us?
Well, we have evidence, of course, that there is a clear gentleman's agreement in a 2014 report, or several reports from 2014. Then Defense Secretary Voltaire Gasmin admitted to the press quite clearly that he had talked with Ambassador Ma Keqing of China at that time, that he is reiterating that the commitment to deliver only food and humanitarian supplies is what is agreed upon. And he says that definitely the Philippines will not be delivering construction materials. The second point I have to make is that there is a U.S. military website, War Zone, with an article in around February or March last year, which announces that the U.S. needs to establish the combined operating base Sierra Madre in that very same spot. So it is very clear that it is an American plot to advance its war in Asia, which, by the way, one of our military analysts, General Victor Corpus, has said the aim of the U.S. in the pivot to Asia is to create tension and war in the region, not to win, because the U.S. cannot win against China in Asia, but to depress the Asian economy and Chinese economy by at least 30% decline of its GDP. The same thing that the U.S. is doing to the European Union today and Germany. So I think it is very naive for the other party a while ago to say that this is the China bullying. In fact, China's massive Navy and Coast Guard and volunteer militia, maritime militia, is an advantage because it does not have to use lethal force. It uses tactics and strategies to blockade the delivery of construction materials that the Americans want to use to repair BRP Sierra Madre.
Okay. Mr. Laris, you want to chip in here?
Yeah, I mean, this is all not very convincing. You know, this is really thinking in conspiracy terms. If there's an article in a military newspaper, that doesn't, of course, mean that the U.S. government is behind it. I can see no reason why the U.S. government wants to provoke instability in the South China Sea. The United States has an immense trade and Gaza. It is not interested in having another crisis on its hands. And the reason why there is close cooperation with the Philippines, Australia, and other countries, Japan and South Korea, is, of course, that they all fear China, that China's action and China's assertive, to put it mildly, assertive behavior in the South China Sea, and it claims to 90% of the South China Sea, has really intimidated other countries.
So I will ask the speaker, why is ASEAN quiet? Why is ASEAN not supporting the Philippines?
I mean, the reading in China and in the Western world is very, very different. And, there's no point to really talk about
So,
that
Mr.
because it
Laris,
differs so much.
Professor
But I
Laris,
think the
why
point
is the US so active in reestablishing its military presence in the Philippines? If the US is not interested in stirring up trouble, why does it acquire for more access to
having a
military
few bases? No, that's a fair question. Having a few bases in the Philippines doesn't mean you create instability. China has a military base in Djibouti. No one claims that China is creating instability in Djibouti. Having military bases doesn't mean you are creating
400
instability.
military bases? You're kidding
Yes,
me. How can you
yes,
say this kind of
yes.
nonsense?
Yes.
This is incredible. There have been innumerable white papers put out by the Defense Department identifying that they want to engage China in the Asiatic regions, and you're just simply denying reality. Now, I know this is very popular in Washington to have a counter narrative that just says, oh, no, we're not doing anything. The fact is, the U.S. has declared their intention time and time again, and you pretending is less than honest.
And it's really very unfortunate for the Philippines because the Philippines today is...
Mr. Lauro, please. Mr. Lauro, you go ahead. Yeah, you wanted to say
And the situation is very unfortunate for the Philippines, which was united under President Duterte for the independent foreign policy. And ASEAN, of course, I have to mention. And the Philippines had been working very well together for prosperity and peace in the region until 2023. Let us make that distinction when BBM, Bongbong Marcos, started approving all these military bases. This is part of the Asia Pivot which has been in the works for the past decade and a half. So this is a strategic move of the U.S. Now, as I said, we are thankful China is employing non-lethal means in controlling the situation, and that is possible because of its size. But the Philippines and the U.S. are trying to use this victim card, how the Philippines, a small David versus the giant Goliath. No, China has been using very peaceful means, and the malice is really coming from the Bongbong government. Even the presidential sister, the sister of Bongbong Marcos, Senator Amy Marcos, has been contradicting the president on these issues. So we are getting divided. We are getting distracted from economic development. Investments are coming down to zero now. They're expecting the Americans to come in, but the recent trade mission did not deliver anything.
All right. Ms. Yan Yan, if you want to jump in there, that's fine. And there's much talk of invoking a mutual defense treaty that's signed in the 1950s between the Philippines and the United States. The U.S. Secretary of State, the so-called Indo-PACOM leader, Admiral John Aquilino, and the U.S. Defense Secretary have all talked about the possibility of invoking the so-called mutual defense treaty. What is the U.S. doing by constantly reiterating their so-called ironclad commitment to such a treaty? Is that treaty applicable here?
Well, actually, first of all, I don't think that the United States is ready to go to a maritime conflict with China for the Philippines, even though it's an ally. But I think the United States is happy to see there is this dispute and this skirmishes between China and the Philippines because it can drag China down. And then secondly, about the MDT, I think the United States has been very cautious to make the Philippines a commitment of whether this arm attack on the vessels, aircrafts, and public vessels is equals to the arm attack on the island territories in the South China Sea. Well, they did never make very accurate commitment given the MDT Article 4. And also, secondly, the United States didn't say that whether the using of a water cannon by the China Coast Guard is equals to an armed attack to the Philippines. So these two things I think is very important, which by that I mean that's my personal thinking that the United States doesn't want to go to a conflict with China.
But it's making a lot of noise. It's posturing about, we are going to stand next to the Philippines up against China, and you have the press, making a big show about China being the bully. What is going on here? Is there some kind of not conspiracy, I wouldn't say conspiracy, but obviously there's a strategy here. What are they trying to achieve, according to you?
I think the President Marcos is given a pressure on the United States, trying to make its ally, making more detailed commitment to the Philippines. And the United States also wanted to see China is distracting by our maritime disputes with our neighboring countries. Well, it's definitely the United States' interest to see that, to maintain its own priority, in the region.
Okay.
Well, that's true, but I think the United States is, although orally they make many commitments, they say they will help the Philippines to go against China, but so far we didn't see much physical, actions.
Mr. Laris, I'm going to give you the opportunity, but keep it short, please. If the U.S. is really interested in seeing peace in the South China Sea, shouldn't it try to constrain or, talk to the Philippines and China and sit down and talk to each other instead of sending more military vessels involved in more military exercises in the region?
The United States is not interested in peace in any part of the world. As we have seen, they had conducted invasions in Asia, the Eurasian continent, everywhere else in the world, and now they have been concerned about the rise of Asia. Now we're being called, we're hearing this Asian century. They want to disrupt that.
Okay.
So that the U.S. can maintain its hegemony.
All right. This question was for Professor Laris.
Sorry.
Professor Laris, yes, please go ahead.
Yeah,
Yes,
talking and to each other. Can I just say something? Talking to each other is, of course, always a good idea. But what would happen if the Chinese military rammed a Philippine boat and it went down? Would that be interpreted as an armed attack on the Philippines?
So why would the Philippine boat be going there?
That situation.
to get
Can I
rammed?
please continue without you interfering? This situation.
You
needs to
interfered.
be
You were the one who interfered. The question was addressed to
Mr.
me.
Laurel, please. Yeah, please.
There is a defense treaty between the
Yeah,
Philippines
this
and the
is-
United States. Of course, the United States doesn't want to invoke that defense treaty. It is warning repeatedly for China to be very careful what it does, so that that defense
All right.
treaty doesn't need to be invoked, so that no counteraction needs to be taken. This is meant as a good warning. It is not meant as aggressive action. And I think we should see how dangerous the situation is and try to de-escalate
Okay.
on all sides, including
All right.
on the side of China. And
Okay.
Yeah,
Professor Laris, I'm really
blockade-
running out of time. I have to block you here because I have two more guests. I want to leave some time before the show wrap up. Ina, what is your reaction? Give it within 30 seconds, please.
Well, I totally disagree. I mean, these are, as I said, State Department talk points aimed at somehow convincing the world that China's at fault. If there's any bully in the world, it's the United States. They're to stand alongside Ukraine. They're standing alongside Gaza. They did wonderful things in Afghanistan. Iraq is a mecca now because of what they've done.
All right. Yan, how is China going to react if it believes that there is this intention to drag China into this unnecessary conflict?
I think, first of all, the Philippines needs to exercise more self-restraint in terms of our dispute in the South China Sea. And secondly, for the United States, we do see a report released last week about the United States increase largely its military activities in the South China Sea, which I think is a strategic deterrence to China, which I think everybody should be pay more attention to. And thirdly, I think I really hope that the BCM, the communication mechanisms, and also the hotline between the Coast Guards between China and the Philippines should keep going and resume.
All right. We are going to leave it there. Many thanks to my guest, Yang Yan, Director of the Research Center of Oceans Law and Policy at the National Institute for South China Sea Studies, Ina Tangen, Senior Fellow at Taihe Institute, Klaus Laris, a Fellow at the Woodrow Wilson Center, and Richard M. Krasno, Distinguished Professor at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and Herman Teoloro, President of the think tank Asian Century Philippines Strategic Studies Institute. Thank you so much. And with that, we come to the end of this special edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin. As always, you can follow me on Facebook and Twitter using the handle Liu Xin in Beijing. On behalf of the whole team, thank you for watching. You've got the point.